At some point in its lifespan, each home video game console will release its last official game. A last call, as it were, telling us in effect, you don't have to go home, but you can't play here. Or can you? You see, some older systems have enjoyed a resurgence over the years, with re releases or in some cases with brand new ones. And of course, many consoles still enjoy a vibrant homebrew community that are still making games for bygone consoles to this day. In this video, however, we are going to focus on the last officially released game for each console over the years. Now, a small disclaimer here, I may not touch on every single console or region, but if I missed something that you felt should have made the list, please let me know in the comments below. Now, let's get started. First, we're going to hop in the DeLorean and go back in time to the very first commercially released home console, the Magnavox Odyssey. This console came with all of the games built into the system itself. These games were very simplistic in nature, containing just a few squares and some lines that moved around the screen. The cartridges themselves were nothing more than glorified punch cards that told the console the configuration and behavior the dots and lines were supposed to have. The console's final launch is thought to be Interplanetary Voyage, released in 1973. This game was not available in stores and was part of a promotional campaign with NASA to help promote the Apollo space program. The first console to truly feature interchangeable games on different cartridges was the Fairchild Channel F, released in 1976. The F stands for fun.
So much fun.
So much fun.
The last first-party title released for the FCF was Video Whiz Ball in 1979, a competitive and fast-paced two-player game similar to Pong and its many variants. After this release, Fairchild sold the rights to the Channel F to a company named Zircon. They released one final game for the system in 1981, a Space Invaders clone known as Alien Invasion. The next console to invade the home video game scene arrived in 1977 with the Atari 2600, which boasted superior processing and graphical capability. It was also known as the Atari VCS or simply Atari. The system is credited with truly kicking off the home video game scene and would dominate the consumer console market for a number of years. The final gem released for the VCS was Acid Drop in 1992, a puzzle game similar to Tetris where players had to match up columns of colored blocks. Or was it? You see, Atari has been revitalizing their brand lately by, among other things, the release of the Atari 2600 Plus. This console can play all of the original 2600 game cartridges. They recently released two new games for the system in 2024 with Mr. Run and Jump and Berserk Enhanced Edition. These cartridges also work on the original Atari 2600s, which means that technically these are the last official releases for the console, at least so far. Intellivision is next on our list and was released 2 years after the Atari in 1979. With its richer graphics, more complex gameplay, and ports of popular arcade titles such as Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, it emerged as the first true challenger to Atari's dominance. Intellivision served up its final game with Striker Super Pro Volleyball in 1989. This game didn't receive a wide release as it was at the end of the console's lifespan. If you have an original copy of this game, it could be worth a nice chunk of change due to its rarity. Atari acquired the brand in 2023 and is actively exploring the possibility of new games for the Intellivision. So, like the Atari 2600, we may see some new releases for this console in the future. Magnavox would attempt to compete with this new line of consoles by releasing the Magnavox Odyssey 2, also in 1979. It was known as the Philips VideoPack G7000 in Europe and as the Philips Odyssey in Brazil. While the system had some unique features, it lacked the power of some of its other competitors. It would power through until bowing out in the US with Power Lords in 1983. Europe was the next to go with Helicopter Rescue in 1984. But the last game thought to be released would be Comando Noturno in Brazil. The exact date of release is unknown, but it is thought to have been the mid-1980s, which would make it the last official release for the platform. The next console to be released would be a handheld, the first of its kind. Meet the Milton Bradley Microvision, also released in 1979. It was a very simple handheld console with a black and white LCD screen, but it marked an important milestone in gaming history nonetheless. The last game for this system was Super Blockbuster in 1982, featuring gameplay very similar to that of the much more popular Breakout. The year the Microvision ended its run was the same year we got the next 3 consoles on our list, starting with the ColecoVision. The ColecoVision boasted more impressive graphical capabilities than the Atari 2600. They had Atari so worried, in fact, that Atari would go on to hastily release a poorly received follow-up console, which we'll talk about in just a moment. The last game released for the system was Alcazar, The Forgotten Fortress, a dungeon action-adventure game in 1985. Or was it? Like the Atari, Coleco has also been trying to revive the brand in recent years. In 2020, they partnered with a company called CollectorVision to release the CollectorVision Phoenix, a console that can play ColecoVision cartridges. Coleco also released a full-sized arcade cabinet in 2024, preloaded with 40 classic games. 2024 also saw CollectorVision release a new game for the ColecoVision called Scramble. Scramble can be played on the original ColecoVision hardware. Now, some may argue that this is a homebrew title and not an official release, but seeing as how they seemingly have the blessing of Coleco themselves, it's a gray area at worst, but I'd say it counts. Let me know what you think of that take in the comments below. Next on our list, the Atari 5200. It didn't fare as well as the ColecoVision or the Intellivision and was considered a flop in just about every sense of the word, with a limited library of games and sporting what is widely considered to be the worst controller of all time. It would finish with a total official library of just 69 games. Not nice. Production of the console ended in 1984, just 2 years after its release. Diehards would still get one final release for the system in 1986 with Gremlins, a scary end for what many consider to be a scary bad system. The next console to be released would come to be credited with single-handedly saving the entire video game industry in the wake of the great video game crash of 1983. That console, of course, was the Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the NES. The last official release in North America was Wario's Woods in 1994. In Europe, it was The Lion King in 1995. The fact that it was still getting new releases at a time when there were vastly more powerful consoles on the market speaks to the enduring popularity of this beloved system. For the Famicom, which was the console's name in Japan, the last official release would be Takahashi Meijin no Boken Jima. Apologies to all of my Japanese viewers right now. This game was also known as Adventure Island 4. It marks the last official release for the NES/Famicom line of consoles. The Sega Master System launched in North America in 1986 as a direct competitor to the NES. Among other regions, it would also be released 3 years later in Brazil, and that will become important in just a moment. Master System wasn't nearly as successful as its counterpart at Nintendo, at least in North America, where it would go on to sell just 2 million consoles. The first to bow out was Japan, which released Bomber Raid in 1989 for the Sega Mark III, which is what the Master System was called over there. The Master System would speed off 2 years later in North America with Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991, kicking off a character that would prove to be a beloved mascot for subsequent Sega systems, much like Mario was for Nintendo. What's crazy, however, is that this console enjoyed an insanely long run in Brazil, selling 5 times the amount of consoles that it did in North America. In 1998, 7 years after it stopped producing games for North America, the Master System would finally call it quits with Mickey's Ultimate Challenge. However, this game was a port of the same game released for the Game Gear in 1994. The last game to be released that was designed specifically for the Master System was in 1997 with the children's game Sítio do Pica-Pau Amarelo, I think I said that right, where you pick fights with tornadoes and use mushrooms as trampolines. Atari would stage a comeback of sorts with one of the final consoles of the 8-bit era, the Atari 7800. It was released in 1986 and was intended to be a competitor of the NES and Sega Master System. Although it sold slightly better than the Master System in North America, with nearly 4 million units, it's still considered a commercial failure due to poor marketing and a lack of quality games. The final game released for this system was Sentinel, an action-packed light gun game. It was released in 1991. A remake of this console along with a limited library of re-released games are still available on Atari's website today. I had a hard time placing the next console on our list, the TurboGrafx 16. You see, this system was marketed as the first 16-bit console, but that claim is somewhat misleading. While it did have a 16-bit graphics processor, it still had an 8-bit CPU. The system was released in North America in 1989, where it performed poorly. However, it was released as the PC Engine in Japan, where it was considered a success. The TurboGrafx 16 called it quits after just 4 years with Bonk 3: Bonk's Big Adventure. The game was a TurboGrafx 16 exclusive up until this point, but Bonk would go on to have further adventures on other consoles later on. For the PC Engine in Japan, the last game released was a survival horror game entitled Dead of the Brain Part 1 and 2 in 1999. Capping off the 8-bit era would be a series of handheld consoles. The first and most popular among them would prove to be the Nintendo Game Boy. It was released in 1989 and was the first system to truly popularize the concept of handheld video games. The last game released for the system in North America was Pokemon Yellow in 1999. Nintendo, I choose you. However, Japan would go on to release the last official title for the system with, here we go, Shikakui Atama o Meruku Suru Kanji no Tatsujin on March 30th, 2001. But upon further research, it looks like the actual last game might have been One Piece Moboroshi no Grand Line Bukenki in 2002. It was released for the Game Boy Color, but was also backwards compatible with the original Game Boy, technically making it the last official title for the system. The Atari Lynx was also released in 1989. Despite being a more powerful console and having a color screen, it didn't do as well as the Game Boy. This was due to a number of reasons, chief among them being the console's extremely poor battery life. Atari shut down production of the console in 1995 to focus on their next big project, which we'll get to a little bit later. The Lynx would blast off that same year with Super Asteroids and Missile Command. However, upon further research, once again, it looks like Telegames released Hyperdrome in 1999, long after Atari ceased official support for the system. It was an official release though, making it the last game for the console. Next up, the Sega Game Gear was released in 1991 in North America. It too was more powerful than the Game Boy and yet did not reach the same level of popularity despite also boasting a color display. The last morsel for gamers to sink their teeth into would be Lost World Jurassic Park in 1997. In 2001, Majesco Games would go on to release some titles that were previously unavailable in North America, such as Super Battle Tank. However, these were re-releases rather than entirely new games, making Lost World the last original title for the system. The next console on our list is the Super Nintendo Entertainment System,
Hi, Super Nintendo!
or SNES, in 1990. Like its predecessor, it too became a beloved console that is still remembered fondly to this day, and had a successful run of nearly 50 million consoles sold over its lifespan. The system hopped off with its last official release of Frogger in 1998. However, the Super Famicom, which is what the system was known as in Japan, saw its final glory with Metal Slayer Glory Director's Cut, released in 2000. Now, if you want to get technical,
I have come here to chew bubblegum and
Get technical.
and I'm all out of bubblegum.
the SNES Mini was released in 2017. The previously unreleased Star Fox 2 was part of its built-in games library, though the title has never seen a release in physical form. Sega, of course, also wanted in on the new 16-bit era and followed up the Master System with the release of the Sega Genesis in 1989, also known as the Mega Drive outside of North America. While not as successful as the SNES, it did have a solid run for 9 years, selling about 30 to 35 million consoles worldwide during its lifespan. It too hopped off the scene in 1998 with Frogger, just like its counterpart, the SNES. At least the Genesis version had some background music. For the Mega Drive, it was Show do Milhão Volume 2, released in Brazil in 2002. After this, we began to enter an age where consoles started to become more and more powerful. Capable of rendering 3D graphics with ease. This opened up endless gameplay possibilities. The first in this lineup of consoles was, you guessed it, the the Neo Geo AES. Released in 1991, it was a powerhouse of a system back in its day, and marked the first time that consumers could have arcade-level graphics in the comfort of their own homes. Final showdown for this system was Samurai Showdown 5 Special in 2004. 1991 also saw the release of the now infamous Philips CDI. It was designed primarily as a home media player first and gaming console second, which might explain why it ultimately flopped. The final game for this system was Solar Crusade in 1999. It was the only game that the console would release that year, and, unlike the console it was released on, would go on to receive generally positive reviews. Seeing the need to compete with the next generation of consoles, Sega went on to release the Sega CD in 1992, originally launched in Japan in 1991 as the Mega CD. Technically, this wasn't a new console, but was rather an add-on to the Sega Genesis, intended to provide additional processing power as well as allowing for more complex games thanks to the superior storage capacity of CDs. I'm sorry, but can we just take a moment here to appreciate Mickey Mouse getting absolutely lit up by this boulder here?
Dumb ways to die.
After just 4 years, the Sega CD decided to tear it up one last time with the release of Demolition Man in 1995, a game based on a popular movie at the time with the same name. The Mega Drive in Japan went out a year later with Shadowrun. Next up,
Definitely.
Cool.
The real 3DO system from Panasonic.
this system would usher in the new wave of consoles sporting 3D graphics. Like the Neo Geo before it, a high price point and limited games library at launch sabotaged its chances for success. The final game released in Europe was Shockwave 2 Beyond the Gate. It featured plenty of full motion video.
Which was the style at the time.
Like the system itself, it was sadly a flop. North America, it would go out guns a-blazing with Creature Shock, a sci-fi action game where humanity takes to the stars to colonize new planets. Japan was the last to hang on and went out with Edi Yosuke Meijin no Shinji Sen Mahjong on June 28th, 1996. Sorry again, my Japanese viewers. I tried. 1993 would also see the release of the Atari Jaguar. This was a system that made a big deal of advertising itself as a 64-bit system with some, shall we say, memorable commercials.
Jaguar, Jaguar, Jaguar.
However, this claim was a bit misleading when you take a closer look at the internals of the console. Despite being the first 64-bit console to hit the market, it failed to gain much traction with consumers because of, you guessed it, a high price point and a limited library of games, among other problems. Atari fought on for 3 years until finally throwing in the towel in 1996 with the fighting game Fight for Life. I won't blame you if you've never heard of this title. It was met with very poor reviews for its clunky gameplay, with one critic going so far as to say that this game was an appropriate send-off for the Jag. A terrible system's terrible last hurrah. Ouch. Well, once again, further research has shown me that Worms was released for the Jag 2 years later in 1998. While not a part of Atari's officially supported lineup, it was a licensed release from Telegames. If you thought that Sega was done with the Genesis, think again.
Let me die in peace.
After the Sega CD, they decided to release yet another add-on in the form of the 32X in 1994. This add-on was widely panned by critics at the time, despite making the Genesis about 40 times faster and sporting the ability to render 50,000 polygons per second. In Europe, the final frontier was the space shooter Darkside in 1995. The 32X would swing out in North America with Spider-Man Web of Fire in 1996. Sega would finally let the Genesis ride off into the sunset in 1995 when they released the Sega Saturn. Facing intense competition from the likes of Sony and Nintendo, the Saturn couldn't quite make its mark on the gaming landscape. However, the system still managed to crank out some quality titles and a few beloved exclusives. It would eventually bid a magical farewell with Magic Knight Ray Earth in 1998, one of only 7 games released that year for the Saturn in North America. The final release in Japan would come 2 years later in Y2K with Yukio Gensukyo Go Perpetual Collection, released in December 2000. I really need some Japanese tutoring lessons, methinks. Nintendo also wanted in on the rapidly growing market for 3D games and came up with an interesting console to address that demand. 1995 would see them release the Nintendo Virtual Boy. Critics of the console complained about its uncomfortable design, poor graphics, and concerns eye strain. Nintendo stopped releasing games just 1 year after the console's launch with 3D Tetris in 1996, having sold less than 1 million systems during its run. At least Nintendo was trying to push the boundaries and explore new frontiers of gaming, even if they didn't quite go about it the right way. 1995 was a busy year for gaming as it also saw the release of the Sony PlayStation. Much like the Atari 2600 solidified gaming at home, the PlayStation is widely credited with truly ushering in the next generation of gaming with an impressive lineup of stellar arcade ports and original titles. It would go on to be the most successful of the consoles released that year. The last official title released in North America was FIFA 2005, released in October of 2004. Quite a run, huh? In Europe, the final title was Snappy 3 Fun Games, released in March 2005. But the last of the last would be Strider Hear You? Strider Hear You in Japan in late 2006. Ay. If Nintendo has shown us anything over the years, it's their ability to be the comeback kid. After the disaster that was the Virtual Boy, they followed it up with the Nintendo 64, or N64 for short. Released in 1996, this console was home to some of the most beloved games of all time. It went out on a kickflip with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 in 2003. Technically, Mario Party 3 and Bomberman 64 would be released later that year in Europe and Japan respectively, but I'm not going to count that since those games both got a release earlier in North America. Nintendo followed up with yet another banger in the Game Boy Color, released 2 years later in 1998. With twice the power of the original Game Boy,
My powers have doubled since the last time we met.
and a color screen instead of plain old black and white, this handheld quickly became a hit. The last game released for the Game Boy Color in North America was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, a game, on November 15th, 2002. In Europe, the last official release was Hamtaro Ham Hams Unite, which was released on January 10th, 2003. In Japan, the last official release was... oh no. Doraemon no Study Boy Kanji Yomikaki Master, which was released on July 18th, 2003. Neo Geo also released their take on a handheld system with the Neo Geo Pocket in Japan and Hong Kong in 1998 and in the UK in 1999. The system ultimately failed, but not before releasing the final game for the console in Facile, which was released in 1999 in Japan and Hong Kong and in 2000 in the UK. Neo Baccarat was released for the Neo Geo's next handheld, but was backwards compatible with the OG Neo Geo Pocket. It was released shortly after Facile, technically making it the last official release compatible with the system. They would go on to release an upgraded version of the console in North America known as the Neo Geo Pocket Color in 1999. Despite some positives, the console struggled to gain any real traction.
Check out what came for you in the mail.
Oh, yeah! What is it?
The last game released for the system in North America is somewhat debatable. Some believe that the final plunge was Dive Alert, Becky's version, while others feel it was SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters Clash. Both were released in 2000. The Last Blade, Beyond the Destiny, was the last Japanese release in 2001. Either way, it was a short-lived run for this system and would signal the end of Neo Geo's attempts at home consoles.
My dear sweet...
Neo Geo.
No more pain where you are now, boy.
That is, if you don't count some modern-day re-releases like the Neo Geo Mini. Sega is back again and ushered in the first console of the 128-bit era with the Dreamcast in 1999, although consoles in general would stop focusing on the amount of bits they had as a marketing feature. Now that 3D gaming was the new standard, other benchmarks such as polygons per second became much more important. Despite being ahead of its time in many ways and introducing many new things to home consoles such as internet connectivity, it was sadly a commercial failure for Sega and would mark their exit from the home console market. They lit the lamp one last time with the release of NHL 2K2 in 2002. Much like the Genesis, however, it would enjoy a longer run outside of North America with the release of Karouse in Japan in 2007. Perhaps we didn't appreciate the console fully over here.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
Or perhaps the Dreamcast simply fell victim to the release of the Sony PlayStation 2 the following year in 2000. PS2 has been recognized as the most successful console of all time, selling over 160 million units worldwide. It had one of the longest lifespans of any home console, finally bowing out in 2013 with Pro Evolution Soccer on November 8th. Nintendo drifts back into the picture once again with yet another handheld release in the Game Boy Advance in 2001, or GBA for short. It surpassed the power of the SNES and could even render some 3D graphics. To this day, it ranks in the all-time top 10 among home consoles. In Japan, the last GBA game released was Final Fantasy VI Advance, which launched on November 30th, 2006. For Europe, it was The Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Night, released on November 2nd, 2007. North America would hold the honor of releasing the final official GBA title ever with Samurai Deeper Kyo, released on February 12th, 2008. 2001 would also see a new player enter the console market with the Microsoft Xbox. It's a little hard to judge the success of the original Xbox in that, while it didn't outrightly fail, it wasn't exactly a moneymaker for Microsoft either. It would go on to lose them billions of dollars during its run despite relatively strong sales and the ever-popular Halo series. Japan would be the first to go with the King of Fighters Neo Wave, released on March 21st, 2007. Europe would follow suit next with Shaolin Showdown, released on June 29th, 2007. But the final touchdown would come in North America with Madden NFL 09, released on August 12th, 2008, making it the last official game released for the platform. Speaking of football, let's tackle the next console on our list with the Nintendo Gamecube, also released in 2001. By this point, the console market was basically down to three major players in Sony, Microsoft, and of course, Nintendo. In terms of sales, the GameCube finished last compared to the competition. The final official game released for the Nintendo GameCube in Japan was The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, which launched on December 2nd, 2006. In Europe, the final release was Ratatouille, which came out on September 28th, 2007. But the final game would be released in North America in 2009 with Madden NFL 08. Would this be Nintendo's final Hail Mary, or could they bounce back from yet another disappointing run? Nokia phones are best known as a meme these days for how tough their older generation cell phones were. But did you know that they made a brief foray into the video game market? Meet the Nokia N-Gage. Despite being a powerhouse of a handheld, it flopped hard in most markets and was discontinued in 2006. Last official release for the system was Payload, a sci-fi action racing game released in 2007. Despite online support officially ending for the console in 2010, it still has a small but dedicated fan following to this day, committed to keeping the platform going with private servers and ports of the system's games library. Returning to our cliffhanger about Nintendo, they once again proved to be the comeback kid by releasing the wildly popular Nintendo DS in 2004.
Remove the stone of shame.
It is considered to be the most successful handheld console ever released and was close to being the best-selling console of all time as well, falling just short of the PS2 in terms of sales. The last digital release was 2016's Crazy Train. However, the last physical game for the system was released in 2014 in Big Hero 6: Battle of the Bay. Not to be outdone, Sony released their own handheld console with the PlayStation Portable that same year in North America. Also known as the PSP, Sony's first foray into the handheld market would prove to be quite successful. The last official release was Retro City Rampage in 2016. While it received some positive reviews, it wasn't exactly a smash hit. The following year, in 2005, saw the successor to the Xbox with the Xbox 360, ushering in the era of high-definition gaming. It was the most successful Western-made console in history and helped solidify Microsoft's status as a major player in the home console market. The 360 had a long run and released its final game fairly recently in 2018, where it danced its final number with Just Dance 2019 across all regions. Sony would respond with the release of the PlayStation 3 in 2006, with slightly better specs than the Xbox 360. It would also go on to later release the slim and super slim versions of the console. While not nearly as successful as the PS2 in terms of consoles sold, it still did extremely well and finds itself among the top 10 consoles of all time in terms of units sold. Depending on who you ask, the last official release for PS3 was Shakedown Hawaii, an open-world adventure game developed by a bunch of Canadians. Pretty cool, eh? Not to be left out, Nintendo also entered the next generation of consoles with the popular Wii. While not as powerful as its competitors, it was an extremely innovative, accessible, and inclusive console. It helped introduce gaming to those that perhaps had little interest in it previously. The final North American release was Just Dance 2020 in 2019, but in Europe, it too got the same last release as the PS3 with Shakedown Hawaii. I guess you could say the developers were trying to shake us down one last time. 2011 would see Nintendo release the successor to the DS with the Nintendo 3DS. It had a bit of a rocky launch due in part to a high initial price point. However, it would recover nicely and go on to have a solid run. For the final release, some may say that it was Shantae and the Pirate's Curse in 2022. However, this game was a physical release of the same game that was released digitally in 2014 rather than a brand new release. That distinction goes to Fragrance Story, a tactical RPG game released in April of 2022. Existing owners also received a free DLC expansion for the game in March of 2023. Nintendo would go on to be the first to hit the market in terms of next-gen consoles with the Wii U in 2012, proving that first doesn't always mean best. It was a disappointing successor to the Wii in terms of sales and market share. Despite this, it did have its share of hits. If you guess that the last game released for the platform was 2017's Zelda Breath of the Wild, you would be wrong. It was the last first-party title to be released by Nintendo. However, the last official release for Japan was Drop It! Block Paradise. In North America and Europe, it would be Pad of Time, released in April of 2022. However, if you only count physical releases, then, believe it or not, that honor once again goes to Shakedown Hawaii, released in summer of 2020. I've never even heard of this game before I started doing research for this video, only to find out that it was among the final releases for 3 different consoles. Not bad for a bunch of hosers. 2012 also saw the North American release of the PlayStation Vita, the successor to the popular PSP. Even though Sony stopped support for the Vita in 2021, the last physical game released was in 2023. That game was Jet Set Knights. This was an extremely limited release with just 1,500 copies of the game thought to be produced, making it a rare collector's item today. However, this was released earlier as a digital title, technically making it a re-release. The last original title for the system was Scourgebringer, released in July of 2021. 2013 would see Microsoft grace us with a new entry into the Xbox lineup with the Xbox One, and gave the system an upgrade in 2016 with the Xbox One S. It continued with its ever-popular Xbox Live and third-party streaming features. Despite 2 more upgrades to the lineup since then, the Xbox One is still releasing new games as of the publication of this video. Let me know in the comments what your favorite game has been so far. Sony released the PlayStation 4 the same year in 2013, and the PlayStation 4 Pro in 2016. Like the Xbox One and One S, games for the PS4 are still being released at the time of the posting of this video. Sony's last official release for the console was in 2024, MLB The Show 24. Sony has announced that they will not be releasing any new games for the system. However, third-party support remains strong, so time will tell when this system will finally ride off into the sunset. 2017 saw the Xbox One X released, which was the final upgrade on their Series 3 console line. Kind of Microsoft's version of a Pro system, if you will. Like the other consoles of the Xbox One line, this console is still releasing games to this day. This brings us to the present day. PlayStation 5, PS5 Digital, PS5 Pro, and PS5 Slim, along with Xbox Series X and S, and of course, Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Switch OLED, and Nintendo Switch Lite round out the current generation of home consoles. With the recent announcement of the Switch 2, we may soon be nearing the final curtain call for the Nintendo Switch 1 and all of its variants. How long do you think games will continue to be released on all of these platforms before the next big thing comes along? Let me know again in the comments below. And that's it for our history of the last official game ever released on almost every home console. Please be sure to let me know if I missed anything, and as always, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and help my small channel grow. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.